Professional Development Committee Lunch and Learn of 2016, and Brent is going to present to us today on the digital divide and higher education.
Yep.
So for anyone who doesn't know, Brent is our RN to BSN and MSN online writing tutor. So Brent, we will turn it over to you.
Okay, so first I'm going to try and screen share, and there you go. Okay, so can everyone see my screen? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Okay, so today I'm just going to be discussing a paper I wrote called The Digital Divide in Higher Education, Recommendations for Strategy-Based Digital Inclusion. So I'm just going to give a background on the digital divide, discuss computer proficiency, and then also provide some recommendations for digital inclusion. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is, what is the digital divide? And I think that everyone who works at a college at some point is going to experience the digital divide, whether you put a name to it or not.
I don't know.
So I think once you work at a college, you'll see that there's wired classrooms. The students are adept at using technology. People participate in meetings while driving. There's, there's new educational technology. But then also, as you continue to work at a college, you'll see that some students require technical assistance when working with students, and so whether you put a name to that or not, you're experiencing the impact of the digital divide. So I'd like to talk about the history of the digital divide, because even though it's a term people use, it's changed over time and it's been conceptualized differently. So the term was first used in government reports on internet access in the 1990s. In fact, it was first used in the report called Falling Through the Net, Defining the Digital Divide. And it was referring to the findings of a gap between those who benefit from the internet and those who do not have access to the internet. So in the 90s, the digital divide was all about access. They found that some people had access to the internet and it was they were benefiting from it. Other people did not have access to the internet. And so the Clinton and George W. Bush administration both believed that all groups should be able to access the internet. And there was a big push in the 90s and in the decade after that to get people access. So US schools had 250,000 computers in 1983. So by 1998, there were 8.6 million computers. Internet usage of US adults increased to 75% by 2009. And so the question remains is, why in 2016 do you still see the impact of the digital divide? And really there was a shift in focus, where initially the concern was all about access. However, in 2002, researchers made a distinction between the gap in access and the second level divide, which is the gap in skills. And the moment a student walks on campus, the access divide has closed. And so really what faculty and staff are concerned with is the second level divide. And this divide may be very subtle in a college classroom. So there was a study that found that freshman students with less internet experience are just as likely to use the internet as their classmates. So students, regardless of their experience with the internet, when they're at college, they use the internet at the same rate. So a question that I asked in my paper, and is going to be kind of the focus of today's presentation, is the question, what does it mean to be good at computers? So if you were to say, talk to John, he's really good at computers, what do we mean by that? And depending on who you ask, you're going to get different answers. But a lot of people would say it's the actual amount of knowledge that someone possesses. So you would say, John knows everything about coding, he knows the latest apps. And you would say, John knows a lot about computers. But is that really what makes up computer proficiency? And where all of us, whether we realize it or not, we're constantly encountering new situations online. So you might learn new software. There might be a new bank website. You might download a new app. And so the question is, are you able to do all these things because you just know everything about the app and the software? Or is it that you have the experience and the problem-solving skills to use those things? And so the thesis of my paper, and what I would say, is that computer proficiency is just as much about your problem-solving skills and experience as is about actual knowledge. And so there's a lot of research to support this idea, where the LexDis project was an in-depth study of how disabled learners interacted with technology. And the researchers were able to identify 31 different strategies that students used when using technology for schoolwork. And so the focus was what happened when a student applied a strategy and it didn't work. And they found that sometimes when an approach did not work, students often lacked the strategy to solve the issue. And so the researchers found that the most important factor in this situation was the confidence to try something new. And the most effective strategy was trial and error. And so what the researchers would say is that if you were a staff member helping the students, certainly you would want to give them the information that they need, but you would also want to let them know where the resources were. And so this is reflected in interviews with college students around the country, such as in the articles Mind the Gap, The Digital Dimension of College Access, and The Digital Identity Divide, How Technology Impacts College Students, which show that a student's experience with computers impacts his or her problem-solving approach. So for example, Lara, who was described as not fluent with technology, she said she felt at a loss as to how to find citations when writing her first paper. And yet Jeff, who could be described as fluent with technology, said of computer skills, I try to figure things out on my own. And this was a common theme that you saw with the student interviews, where in fact, Jeff, he also built his own computer. And there was a student who was the most fluent of all, and he said he felt comfortable just troubleshooting his computer on his own. And so you can see that pattern. And so these would be my recommendations, is that computer assistance is as important as computer access. And so, for example, the offices such as financial aid or the registrar, they could create a tip sheet for students to log into services. If for educational software, faculty could create an instructional video. And also, looking at computer proficiency as a problem-solving approach can help faculty and staff. It can give them insight into computer issues. So, for example, if you teach in a computer lab, the students who are most enthusiastic about using computers can still experience issues with technology. And as a faculty member or a staff member, when a student is experiencing issues, you can also gain some insight on what might be happening on the student's end. So an example of underconfidence would be, if a student says, I don't see the icon, and you email back and they say, I still don't see the icon. Perhaps they do, and they just need a little bit of confidence just to take a leap and to click the icon. Then maybe an example of overconfidence would be if a student said, I accidentally deleted my discussion posting, where perhaps they're clicking an icon and something deletes. And so what I would say is that you could have a computer assistance approach that includes strategies as well as information. So suppose a student was trying to upload a discussion posting and you were on the phone with that student. You could ask, how are you, where is the problem? How are you uploading the discussion? That would allow you to see the exact issue that the student was experiencing. If you're working next to a student and suppose they're trying to upload a document and you see that they're not using folders and they're looking around for the file, you could suggest using folders. And those are known as epistemic actions. And so the student won't just be able to upload a discussion post, but will gain a solution to a problem. And sure, so I'd like to say that I think definitely the faculty and staff in our program do an excellent job of supporting the students. And what I found in my research is when a student has an approach and it doesn't work, what you don't want is for the student to get stuck. And so I think that it really helps that all of our resources are in Vanco Hall. There's a lot of tip sheets. And so I think the students will know where to go. And as they keep using technology, they'll gain confidence and they'll grow as a learner. And so I think what this presentation can help with is it can help give faculty and staff insight onto what might be going on the student's end. And also, I think if you look at computer proficiency as a problem-solving approach, it can also help us better help our students. And so that's it. So does anyone have any questions?
I do, Brent.
Mm-hmm.
So when you were talking about problem-solving strategies and you know, students coming to a point and they don't know what to do, what the next strategy is, I look at that as like resilience or grit, like, you know, determination to figure something out. So I'm just curious, did you look at age differences among students, or was it just that their students or where they are in the program? Are these new students coming in?
You know, I think that's one main change of the digital divide, where in the 90s, everything, the digital divide was so clear cut. But the way it's conceptualized today is it really isn't so clear cut, where anyone can be affected by the digital divide. It can be any age, any background. And so you'll have a variety of students who are affected by this.
Okay, because just one of the things, I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about how now younger kids they're handed everything and they're given everything, and they're not made to struggle to figure out, so that grit and that resilience isn't there. So I just was curious if you were seeing anything, but I also am I'm assuming that younger people are better at using a computer, but that is not the case. I don't think that that's true at all.
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting.
Yep, that's what my research has shown, is that it's not as clear cut.
Mm-hmm. Good. Very interesting. Thanks.
Yep.
Brett, could I ask, is it just computer technology, or do you think it's technology in general?
Nope, it's technology in general. And really what I think my paper was about, where it's just the problem solving skills. There's a gap in and that will affect you in school. That will affect you if you try and order a pizza online. And so I think the way you close it is by just strengthening problem solving skills. And maybe it's something that a student learned in class, they might apply to, you know, ordering something online. And so I think that's how you close the gap.
And I think what's interesting, I always like to hear the language of confidence, and some of the faculty I've had conversations about my interest in self-efficacy, which is really the confidence to be able to carry out a task. And it would be, I'm sort of thinking of other potential projects that address your research here, Brent, is just looking at, you know, measuring self-efficacy on students' ability to navigate the LMS before they even start our program. And I mean, we always assume, and Becky, UNIV is a fabulous course. We always assume that students need to be exposed to a certain amount of content or skill set, and they need to meet outcomes of that class, because, and everything that's in there that makes sense. But we haven't really done an assessment of students pre-matriculation in our program. It may be something that, some other barrier that is preventing them from not struggling, I guess is what I'm saying.
I think that would be really interesting to see where they're at in UNIV, because then, and we had this conversation yesterday, Mary Pat, that I see them in Patho, and sometimes it's leaps and bounds difference between when they first started UNIV, and maybe they've taken a class in between UNIV and Patho, but even just coming into Patho, the confidence in using the computer from you know, previous and writing citations and all that. So I think that would be really interesting to measure, to see where they're at before.
Yeah, and I think we do a good job where Lara, she was a student who was talking about how, you know, she did find assistance, but kind of later on, where maybe the second semester she had a session with the library, or later on a session where she would learn how to use computers. And I think what she was saying was to get that immediately. And I think that would also support, if you look at computer proficiency as a problem-solving approach, that really on day one, the student would need kind of courses. And so I think that's good that the moment that a student enters our program, they have UNIV, and I think it's an incremental approach. And so I think definitely I see students, gaining some confidence. They, especially with PowerPoint presentations, to do that in their first course.
Yeah, and I have 2 students now. I was telling Mary Pat about it and talked to Sherry about it. Both of these students, one is in UNIV now and one does not have UNIV. They're both in the death and dying class, and I can see a significant difference in their performance compared to those students who've already had UNIV, and they're kind of at a disadvantage.
Mm-hmm. And no, I definitely think it helps having all the resources, when you first start the program. And I think the faculty do an excellent job of referring the students to the resources where the students start submitting assignments to me in the first week of UNIV, which I think is good because I think it shows, they know where I am and how to submit an assignment to me.
Brent, I have a quick question. When you talked about the sort of the self-efficacy that they're sort of learning as they're submitting, that DQ isn't just a DQ, it's something that's going to help prepare them for something else later in life. Was there anything in the research that talks about sort of the role of like instructional design with that as an ongoing process other than as a sort of starting point? Like, I think UNIV is great. I teach it, I love it, but I also see sort of progressive changes as they move through their program. But is there any way for us, when we think about moving students from, let's say, a bachelor's program to a master's program where we know that there's probably going to be another learning curve there, was there anything that talked about sort of addressing that, or do you have recommendations for addressing that ongoing sort of designy point of stuff?
I didn't really see a lot of that in the research, but what I would say is, once again, if a student enters the master's program, they might have a bachelor's degree in nursing, but that might be their first online program. And so once again, in their first course in the master's program, perhaps you could think about that. And again, maybe make sure the resources are all there. And sure, I think the one thing that helps the most is when the students just don't get stuck. They can't figure out how to upload something, but they know who to contact. And I think that process begins. And so I guess just thinking that, even though definitely it's not their first nursing course, it may be their first online course in the master's program.
I have sort of a half-formed question, so maybe I can just sort of throw out what I'm thinking here, and if anybody else has any thoughts, you can help me out. I'm sort of wondering about the role of modeling for students, the problem-solving processes that we use to figure something out when something doesn't work quite the way you expect it to, the way you usually do it. I wonder if sometimes, because students will send me emails and say, oh, I can't get to this database, or I don't know how to do this, or I can't, I wonder if sometimes I'm disadvantaging them by giving them step-by-step instructions and screenshots and saying, do this, do this, do this, because it gives them the illusion that I already know how to do this and this is how you do it and that's it, rather than, seeing that process of, oh, okay, I hit this roadblock here, so what are my other ideas about what I might try? Obviously the timing is a factor because I don't have the opportunity to get on Zoom with them most of the time for them to see what I'm doing, but you sort of see what I'm getting at?
Yep. And, I still think that could be okay if you give them screenshots, because I think also that's good just customer service if a student wants to learn how to, set up a running head, to give them a tip sheet. And, but I think sometimes, these things are opportunistic where you help a student, but maybe you might see an opportunity where there's something you can teach them. And but there was a lot in my research about the library services where, again, and I talk about this in my paper, where you could apply the same critical thinking approach where the students, when they use like a database, how they search for terms is affected, where their search might be way too broad, or it might be way too specific. And so I think the same critical thinking and problem solving approach, there were some librarians who wrote about the digital divide where they did that in their sessions. So.
Yeah, no, librarians are all about the digital divide. I learned a lot about this in library school. But definitely I think it was Jill talked about the persistence issue, which is something I see a lot in trying to help students, because they'll search once, maybe twice, and if they can't find what they're looking for with one or two searches, it must not be there.
Mhm.
Or
Yep.
even just this weekend, we had an issue with the search box that's on the library homepage and some of the other places. And a lot of the students just gave up. They had no idea that there were any other paths to access library resources other than that one search box, which was really alarming to me.
Yep. And
Well,
that's
and thank you, Amanda, for addressing that with the students too. It was nice for you to reinforce that there are other options out there for them. I did see that response, so thank you for that.
I think if they get bogged down in the technology and trying to figure it out, they get frustrated and they give up as well. So, sometimes it's easier to do the screenshot and boost them up that way so they don't get overwhelmed. That's just my experience.
Mm-hmm. And I think what's really effective is just getting them to the next step, where even if you can show them, a link, here's where the resources are, or where you can find other tip sheets or things like that. As long as they can just keep moving along, I think they'll get better. And I think that the difficult point, I've seen in my research is when students get stuck and they don't know what the next step is. They can't find their article, or they can't set up a running head, and they don't know where to go. Where I think someone who has excellent computer proficiency, they might run into that same situation, but then they know exactly how to get help, what resources to use.
And sometimes I think it gets lost in translation sometimes. For instance, yesterday there was a student who was asking me about due dates for something, and I thought he was talking about due dates in the course, but he wasn't. He was talking about the due dates on the practicum site. So without being, involved in that, going a bit further with it, I wouldn't have known. And so we could have been chasing our tails for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, Brent, there's a video in UNIV how to set up a running head.
Yeah, the resources in UNIV are excellent, I would say.
They should know how to do that.
Yep.
Do we have any other questions? All right, thank you, Brent. We appreciate that. And if that's all, I think everyone have a great day.
Sounds good. Yep. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Brent.